All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. We are really excited to have you here, and it's so nice to see all of your faces. So this is a series hosted by Jewish Voice for Peace New York City called Conversations with Movement Elders. JVP New York is a chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. That's the national grassroots organization made up of 20,000 members and hundreds of thousands of supporters who work for freedom, justice, and dignity for all people from here to Palestine. My name is Elena Stein, and I have the privilege of being the staff organizer with JVP New York. So this series came about because here in New York, we've been at one of the epicenters of this crisis. And in the midst of it, we've just felt a very natural desire to turn to those who've led our movements for racial, economic, gender, and environmental justice, and to ask them to share their experiences and their wisdom for this moment. We're turning to them to ask, in essence, what do you think we should know for right now? And we are incredibly fortunate to be part of a multi-generational political community where asking those questions and finding the right people to turn to is all too easy. That is one of the many, many gifts of being in community with each other. So we began this series. It's every Wednesday. It's 1 to 2:30 Pacific, 4 to 5:30 East. And if you are here now, if you came to this conversation, but you haven't been to others and you're not registered for the series, I encourage you to go sign up. It's jvp.org/movement elders. And you can also see recordings of our previous conversations with other phenomenal people there. And if you want to get involved with JVP New York in other ways and be part of a political community that's taking action during this time, whether that's trying to get people out of prison right now or trying to leverage our voices against further annexation of Palestinian lands, email newyork@jewishvoiceforpeace.org and we'll get you plugged in. So today, we are incredibly lucky to be in conversation with the amazing Shatzi Weisberger, to learn lessons from her life and to hear from her about what she calls the art of dying. And before beginning, I just want to acknowledge that death and dying is a really hard topic, and it brings up for I'm sure for all of us, some of our deepest wounds and scars or our fears. And so know that this conversation is about getting to hear from Shatzi about her life, her experience, and her perspective. It's not meant to be prescriptive. So listen for what resonates for you. Okay, so before we begin, I just want to set the scene. I know we're all at our computers and we've all been living at our computers these past 2 months, and it can be a little constraining. Shatzi invites people over to her home to have these kinds of conversations with her. So if you wouldn't mind taking a liberty with me, imagine yourself in Shatzi's home right now. You're in a studio apartment. It's near Central Park. And this home is full of big windows. Are you showing us your home, Shatzi?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, turn your camera up just a little.
How's that?
Can you point it towards the windows?
How's that?
Turn it to the left a little bit. Or maybe just do a 360. Good, good, perfect. Okay, raise it up just a little bit.
Oh, I see. Wait a minute now. I see what the problem is. There we go. Okay.
This is amazing. Yes.
There we go.
Yes, you don't even have to imagine it. You can see it.
There it is. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Dream come true. Okay, so now you're in Shatzi's gorgeous home with her. As you can see, there is this beautiful bed and these big windows with lots of plants and stained glass plaques. It's a gorgeous space. And just to keep painting the picture a little bit, a detail that you couldn't see is that around the home, there are all kinds of objects. There are lamps and ceramics and other special items. And in the corner of every item is a little white label with someone's name on it. And that's the name of the person that item will go to after Shatzi dies. This is her bequeath list.
Yeah.
And folded next to her couch, where she's seated now, is a white garment with a handwritten label over it that says, "My death gown." So imagine yourself in this special home, sitting on the couch with her or across in a chair, making yourself comfortable, getting curious about everything you see around you. Now, Shatzi. So you were born in Brooklyn in 1930. That makes you 1 month away from turning 90 years old.
Amazing.
What did you say?
I think it's amazing.
It's amazing. You've lived many chapters or volumes within this life. You were a nurse for 47 years. You're most fascinated with the beginning and the end, with birth and with death. Your years as a nurse included the height of the AIDS epidemic, where you accompanied people living and dying with the virus. Meanwhile, throughout your entire life, you've been an organizer for different struggles for justice. You were part of the struggle against nuclear weapons and the anti-war movement, where you did many actions against nukes that sent you to jail for many days. You were part of the anti-incarceration, anti-prison movement, where you distributed a publication called No More Cages. You were part of the effort to build, you were an organizer for 25 years, working to build the Independence Party, an independent political party. And you've been involved, as you are now, in the struggle for Palestinian freedom, including organizing with the Palestine Solidarity Committee. You're also involved in the women's movement, amongst many others. And today you organize with JVP-NYC and you sing with the Brooklyn Women's Chorus. So, and this is before we even get to your whole chapter of life as a death educator, which we're eager to get into in a little bit. So I want to start by asking you about your early life and your politicization. You are the great granddaughter of Samuel Gompers, who was the founder of the American Federation of Labor. Can you tell us about your early life, your family, and your influences, and how you became active in political work?
Sure. First of all, thank you everybody for zooming in. Growing up, my mother and my grandparents spoke a great deal about the fact that I had this famous ancestor. Whenever I had to write papers for school, I always had a lot of material about Samuel Gompers, so I always wrote a paper about my great-grandfather. And I believe that I have organizer's blood. It's in my veins. I became an organizer pretty young, and I will be an organizer till the day I die. And I feel an obligation to pass on anything that I have learned. And so I run a lot, I've been in a lot of groups and doing a lot of workshops. Elena, tell me where I should go now.
Can you talk to us about your earliest memories of becoming political and which struggles you got involved in and the highlights of those struggles?
Be glad to talk about that. When I was about 11 years old, I was in summer camp, and I mentioned to the son of the people who owned the camp, who ran the camp, and he was a teenager. He was probably about 18-ish. And this was the time when there was a lot of information in the paper about Gandhi and India's struggle to become liberated. And I mentioned to this teenager that that I thought that, that it really was important that India should become liberated from England, but that they weren't quite ready yet. And he said, well, why do you think that? And I said, well, I read it in the paper. And he said, well, he didn't say Shatzi. My name wasn't Shatzi at the time. It was Joyce. My mother gave me the name Joyce. You can't believe everything you read in the papers. And I have recognized that that's true all of my life. And so that was I think that was my earliest memory of being political, of being interested in something political. When I lived out on Long Island, I was part of a group that if a Black family looked at a house that they wanted to buy, and they were told, oh, no, we have a deposit on this house already, or somebody's already bought it, it's not available. So then I, white woman, would go, and sure enough, the house was available. So, we brought pressure on the real estate industry there. That was a pretty early involvement that I had. What I would like to do is show a picture of a statue of Samuel Gompers in Washington, D.C., and I am actually standing in front of the statue. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see it great.
Okay, good. Well, I decided to become a nurse, and I want to show another picture because this is one of my absolute favorite pictures of all time. This is when I was a student nurse. Got it? See it? There we go.
Beautiful.
And unlike today's college students, I never had a student debt. My dad paid for my undergraduate work. I think it was $17 or $18 a credit, and the government paid for my graduate work. And my graduate work was a master's in psychiatric nursing. After I graduated, I got a job in a state hospital, and I had the grandiose idea that I could affect change. Well, I couldn't, not as a single person. I didn't have any connections, and I hated it. And I got involved in anti-psychiatry work, and so I couldn't earn a living doing something that I was very opposed to. When I taught nursing, I taught nursing a lot, as well as working in hospitals and doing home care with people with AIDS. So I want to show another picture. This is a picture of me when I was teaching at Stony Brook. A student took this picture. An early memory that I have of being political was when I moved to New York. Actually, I started to doing anti-nuke work while I was still out in Long Island. But then when I moved to New York, there was a demonstration, and we all lay on the ground as if there had been a nuclear attack. And I remember crying because I felt that I was in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right people. And I just felt so appreciative of that, so grateful that I had found this group and I was doing this work. And together with a few other lesbians, we formed DON'T, Dykes Opposed to Nuclear Technology. And that was before 3 Mile Island. Now, those of you who are on the younger side, probably many don't even know what 3 Mile Island was, but there was a nuclear meltdown in Pennsylvania, and radiation was in the air, and it was very frightening. And so, whereas initially this group DON'T, many people had no idea what was going on nuclear-wise, but after 3 Mile Island, it was part of the general political scene. And I didn't feel the need to continue working in that sphere anymore because, I wanted to be more progressive. So where should we go now, Elena?
Can you tell us a little bit? People are very excited to learn about DON'T. Can you tell us about a few other groups that you were part of?
Sure. An early group that I was part of was called the Yentas, and this was a group of lesbians, and we met every Friday night, and we lit candles, and we had challah, and we drank wine, and we chatted about everything. And I kept urging the group to be political, be political, be political. And we did then start to be political. I did effectively convince people that's what we had to do. And so we went to, let's see, we actually, at around that time, a group of us went, it was International Women's Day, and we went to demonstrate a conference at PS41 in Greenwich Village. And in the middle of the conference, which was focusing on women in Nicaragua and elsewhere, political women, somebody from the group that I was with, we were about 10 of us, shouted out, and she was not Jewish. She says, well, what about Jewish women? And so the organizers agreed.
Meaning,
that,
what about the oppression of Jewish women?
Well, excuse me. No, about political Jewish women who were political. Yeah. So the organizers agreed to meet with our group afterwards. So we had a short meeting and agreed to meet again. And in the meantime, I realized that I had to really educate myself over the issue in the Middle East, because I grew up very Zionist. We bought, when I was married, we bought lots of trees. And when I saw the movie Exodus, I was so thrilled. I feel so ashamed now, but actually I've come a long way, baby. So I had already started beginning to question what was going on between Israel and Palestine, but I didn't know a great deal about it. So I decided I had to educate myself before this second meeting took place. And it just opened my eyes completely. I had no idea. And it was shocking. And that was the start of my support for Palestinian rights and my anguish over what the Zionists were doing to the Palestinians. And it just broke my heart that the Jewish people, who were always in the forefront of civil rights, now were the oppressors. And I marched every year in the Gay Pride March. So here's a picture of me carrying a banner which says, let me see. It says, Jews for Palestinian self-determination.
And what year was that?
You know, I'm really not good at remembering years.
It was a while ago.
I don't know. So,
can you tell us a bit about you? So from there, you got involved in the struggle for Palestinian self-determination. What did that look like?
Well, I got involved with the Palestinian Palestinian Defense Committee. Rabab Abdul Hadi was the organizer of that. And I worked with Rabab for many years, and what a blessing that was. And I was in charge of the literature table. I lived in a third floor walk-up, and I had crates of books, maybe about easily 7, 8 crates of books that I would schlep downstairs. I had a car at the time, thank goodness, and then afterwards schlep them upstairs. And I can't imagine that I did that, but I really did it. And it was wonderful working with Bob. And then let's see, what do I want to talk about now?
You worked with the Palestine Solidarity Committee, correct?
Yeah. And the group did, you know, many different things, and did a conference, and, you know, I always just was there to be supportive and help with the food or whatever, you know. And we talk. I did workshops. I went to the Michigan Women's Music Festival with a group of friends, and we did a workshop on self-determination for Palestinians and things like that. Yeah. And here in the city, did workshops as well in the women's movement. Yeah.
Great. And I wanted to ask too about a few more political groups that you were part of. You distributed the anti-incarceration paper, No More Cages.
Yeah.
And you were part of Radical Jewish Lesbians Organizing.
Yes, yes.
Is there anything about either of those groups or any other political group you were part of that you want to share with us?
Let's see. Well, it's not a political group, but in a way, yes, actually it is. I sing with the Brooklyn Women's Chorus. I've been with them for about 10 and 11 years. And we sing socially relevant songs, so it is political, definitely. Bev Grant is the director, and many of the songs that we sing, she has written, and she arranged all of them. This is, we do a concert, pretty much a yearly concert at Borough Manhattan Community College, and that's fun. And let's see, what else?
Some of us got the privilege of hearing you sing and watching a performance recently, and it was absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
So, oh, great. We've got somebody else here who sang with the Brooklyn Women's Chorus. So after being part of so many struggles, you then committed 25 years of your life to organizing with the Independence Party.
Yes.
Can you tell us, what is the Independence Party, and tell us about that organizing?
Well, it's a New York State-based party, and the founding of this party, one of the people most directly involved in it is Dr. Lenore Fulani, and I have a picture of Dr. Fulani here. She actually, she made history in 1988. She ran for president of the United States. She was the first woman and the first African-American to get on the ballot in all 50 states. And so the founding of the Independence Party was to build a party that people of color, Black people in particular, were at the table right from the very beginning. And the key focus was, and still continues to be, one of the key focuses is the fact that many states do not allow independents to vote in primaries. Millions of people like myself do not belong to a major party. And New York State is one of the states where I am a second-class citizen. I'm disenfranchised. I cannot vote in the primary. So I did work for about 25 years with the Independence Party. And early on, it turned out that New York City broke away from the state party. We had too many very, very serious political differences. So New York City Independence Party is what I worked with and for. And I was asked to organize the Bronx. I didn't live in the Bronx, but we didn't have an organizer in the Bronx. And at the time, and I suspect probably still, the Bronx is the largest urban county the poorest urban county in the United States, not the largest, the poorest urban, not rural, but urban. So I was very, very passionate about it. It was a 24/7 proposition, and I made many, many phone calls, and also went to the Bronx very often and knocked on doors and told people about the Independence Party. I also went throughout the state to community colleges, all the way up as far as Buffalo, and all the way out as far as Eastern Long Island. And I would go to the community colleges, and I would wander around, and I would then sit at a table where there were students eating their lunch, and I'd introduce myself, and I'd say, can we talk for a little while? I would like to tell you about the work that I do. And I told the students about the Independence Party, and Dr. Lenore Fulani, and quite a few students registered into the Independence Party. In the Bronx, and throughout the state, but mostly the Bronx, I had to go to members of the Independence Party. I couldn't just stand on a street corner like the Democrats do and ask people to sign a petition. So I had to go throughout the Bronx asking people to sign this petition. And I did those activities for for like 25 years. And I got a lot of recognition for the work. I worked hard and I did good work. And after about 25 years, I realized that it was too labor intensive. I no longer had a car, which made it hard to be in the Bronx. And that summer, I had actually done quite a bit of work in a project right near where I live, Frederick Douglass Projects, and I did a lot of work there in the summertime. But then after the summer, I wasn't doing the work, and that was like, so different from the 25 years. And I had, I didn't feel well, or I'm too tired, I'll do it tomorrow. And this went on for a couple of weeks, and I really was quite disgusted with myself, and I felt very irresponsible. And until finally it occurred to me, I didn't want to do it anymore. And once I realized that, it was such a relief. And I also cried because it was such a passion for all those years. And I lost that. I lost something important. But about 3 or 4 days after I made that decision, I realized I need a project. I'm bored. So I had to think about, what do I want to do next? And I decided that I wanted to pursue an interest that I had always had as a nurse. I was always, as you mentioned earlier, Elena, always interested in coming into the world, women giving birth, and people dying, leaving this world. And I wasn't that comfortable with dying, but I was interested in it. So I took a course at the Open Center. It was a 5-month, 90-hour certified course in thanatology, which is the study of death and dying. And then I also studied with the Visiting Nurse Service of New York to become a volunteer with hospice. And so I started doing that work. Now, what I've left out, and I want to go back a bit, is that as a nurse, I did home care with people with AIDS quite a few years in the early part of the AIDS epidemic. And things were very different then in terms of the AIDS epidemic and this pandemic that we're in currently. The AIDS epidemic was secret. People didn't talk about it. You didn't read about it in the papers. And none of our elected leaders would utter the word AIDS. If people died from AIDS, the obituary never mentioned that they had died from AIDS. Whereas the the pandemic that we're in is widespread hysteria. So that's a big difference. And I also worked with ACT UP for a number of years as well. The work in ACT UP primarily was talking about holistic approaches as opposed to, vaccines and medication.
Mm. So let's talk about your transition to becoming a death educator.
Good.
Prior to meeting you, I'd never heard this term, death educator. But you're part of something that, again, another term that I had never heard, the positive death movement. Yes. And my understanding now is that this goes by many names, but people who are trying to break open the fear of death and the taboos around death. Many of us are very fearful of death. Our society is organized around this fear, about denying it, prolonging it, putting it out of sight. And I would say that for me personally, I didn't even realize how profound my own fear of death was until I started talking with you. And being in conversation with you about it has revealed to me how central that fear is, that if I drill down into other fears, at the base or near the bottom is the central fear of death. And just knowing that, just beginning to understand it I'm finding it very, very powerful. And it's turning my head right around. Can you talk about fear of death and the silence around death? And can you talk about what brought you to investigate and explore death and dying as you have?
Sure. Well, Elena, your fear of dying and most people's fear of dying is not any shortcoming on your part. We live in a death-phobic society. And years ago, probably 125, 150 years ago, people died at home. They didn't die in the hospital. So I'm not saying that people didn't have any fear of death. I'm sure some did even then. But it was a part, it was natural. Even children recognized that dying was part of living. People died. And now we've medicalized our health. Women have babies in hospitals with doctors instead of home with midwives, and people die in hospitals. And you mentioned that there's this positive death movement. So there have been books written lately. Atul Gawande, a doctor, his book was on the bestseller list, the New York Times bestseller list for years. And there's been TV programs. And I had a funeral, which was a funeral before I died. And over 100 people came, and it was written up in the New York Times. And one of the things at the funeral is I had a full-size biodegradable casket, and people decorated it with all sorts of pictures that I had, of my life and political stuff and statements. It was beautiful. And the chorus sang, and I talked about where I was at, and I think it had an impact on, and I know it had an impact on a number of people. Now I can't say why I was interested in death. I just was. One thing, I mean, I always was, even as a youngster. But then when I decided to get involved in it and study it, one of the things that had a big impact on me was that my best friend died. This was before I had actually started to study. And I was in the hospital. Well, let me go back a minute. She was healthy as far as we knew. She felt fine and woke up one morning and was very sick, and ended up in the ER. And they took a bunch of tests, sent her home, and a week later she ended up in the ER again with many symptoms. And they hospitalized her, and I was there when the doctor came in and notified her that she had an incurable cancer. And it told her that we can do chemotherapy, we can do radiation, we can give you medication, we can't do surgery, it's too far gone, or you could do hospice. And her response was, I've had a good life, I'll do hospice. So she went home with the hospital bed, and the hospice nurse came, and her son, Stephen, who was a healthcare worker, was her main provider. And when she was home the first week, we chatted, we laughed, we talked, she watched TV, and then the second week it hit her. And she was terrified. And she was a person who normally loved to process everything, and she was so terrified she couldn't talk about it. All she would say to me is, she said, I'm a coward. That's how scared she was. And she decided to do VSED. VSED is VSED, voluntary stopping eating and drinking. Her mother who had leukemia, also did VSED. And she actually died a little over a week later. So I never had an opportunity to really help her in any way other than just to be there with her. I know that if she had lived and my sharing what I was learning about death and dying at the Open Center, she would have been very interested, very fascinated, I'm sure of that. But it didn't happen. But one of the things that did happen is that here she was with abdominal cancer, and she had no pain. Amazing, absolutely incredible. So when she was so scared, it wasn't about the pain. She had no pain. It was about the letting go, and it was about what I have learned. She didn't speak of this, but this is what I have learned from somebody who has had enormous influence on what I know about death and dying, and that is Stephen Jenkinson, who wrote a book called Die Wise, a manifesto for, one second, here we go. A manifesto for sanity and soul. This is Stephen Jenkinson's book. Now, what he says is that although people say that what they're afraid of in dying is pain and suffering, he says that's not the case. He says what people are afraid of is that when they're gone, and nobody would really connect with them anymore or even remember them anymore. That had a tremendous impact on me, that it's not about the pain and the suffering. Well, it's not totally about the pain and suffering. Surely that's some of it, but not totally it. So I want to talk about the positive death movement. The positive death movement, what's behind it is palliative care. Now, palliative care, the object of palliative care is to reduce pain and suffering. A very admirable thing, absolutely. But that's the goal. And the way that goal is achieved most often is with medication. We have medication for pain, we have medication for anxiety, we have medication for restlessness. And when people are dying, not only are they in pain, sometimes, often, although dying is not painful. The body knows how to die. The organs start to shut down one by one by one. It's not painful. Disease is painful, but dying is not painful. But what I recognized about the positive death movement is that given that the goal is to end pain and suffering, and that the way that is generally achieved is through medication, that very often people are semi-conscious, people are unconscious in the dying process. And what I have come to realize, based on what I've learned primarily from Stephen Jenkinson, is that this dying process is a very mysterious thing. And who knows what it's all about. Very few people talk about it. Very few people have written books about it. So for myself, I want to experience that. I want to know what it is. And I want to tell everybody what I'm going through. Now, originally, when I started, even long before I started studying about death and dying, myself and most of my friends, we signed up for, to get, once we died, that our bodies would be picked up by a medical school, and then the med students would be able to do autopsies and learn about human anatomy. And so I had signed all the papers. They were on the wall right next to my bed. And but when I took the course at the Open Center, I learned that cremation, which is what happens after the med students took the autopsy, they cremate the body. And what I learned about cremation is that it is toxic and it pollutes the air. And I'm an environmentalist, so I couldn't bear the thought that my body was going to pollute the air. So I decided that I wanted something different. Now, here we are in the pandemic, and I'm self-isolating, and not a single soul has come to my home since the beginning. I haven't had a hug, I haven't given a hug, I haven't made a meal for anybody. So things are very different at the moment. But what my plans were, and I had elaborate plans, I was hoping that I would not die in my sleep, that I wouldn't die of getting hit by a car or falling and hitting my head and having a concussion. I wanted to know, I wanted time to experience the dying process. So my plan was, hopefully, that when I would be notified that I had an incurable illness, and I know better than, I know very well that I wasn't going to have any chemo or radiation or take a lot of meds, because although that does that does increase a person's life. Most people will live longer. The quality of their life very often is pretty awful. Nausea, hair falling out, pain, the meds had all sorts of side effects, so they have to get meds for the side effects, and then those meds for the side effects have side effects, so they need more meds. Anyhow, I wasn't going to go for any of that. So this is what I wanted for my end of life. I wanted to be in my bed that you saw earlier. I wanted my friends to come and say their goodbyes and pick up their bequeathed items. And then when I actually died, Amy Cunningham, who is a fantastic funeral director, she would come and she would bring a tray of dry ice, and my body would be placed on the tray of dry ice, and then anybody who hadn't gotten here while I was in the dying process, if they wanted, they could come and say their final goodbyes and have some closure. And then Amy was going to drive my body upstate for a green burial. Now, the reason we had to go upstate is because none of the local cemeteries do green burials. So I had a choice, and I could have chosen a site in a field where family, friends could plant something, a tree, a bush, whatever, or the woods. And I chose a site in the woods. So Amy would drive my body up, and I would be wrapped in a shroud. Now, a green burial, you can have a casket as long as it's biodegradable. It could be cardboard, it could be wicker, pine. Actually, Jewish burials are green burials. And I would be buried in the woods in this shroud. And then my body would start to deteriorate and stuff would grow. Weeds, bushes, flowers, maybe a tree. So I experienced that, unlike the vision, the early vision that I had being on a slab, and I had seen many autopsies, so I knew what it was and where they cut the body and all the internal organs. So that vision of what was happening after I died to this vision of what will happen. Maybe a tree will grow. And I feel I'm bringing life into the world with my dying. I like that a whole lot better. And then at some point, I also want to talk about some newer stuff that I have started to learn about more recently. But
thank you, Shatzi. Thank you so much for everything that you just said. One of the many ways I think you break through fear of death, and I don't just mean personal fear of death, but fear of death of our loved ones, fear of death of people we don't know, which is profound right now, is by talking about your own death and your plans for it. And you have more extensive plans for your own death than any person I know, or at the very least, we've talked about it more. And I'm so taken by it. I mean, you know what food is going to be served at the wake while you're in the final stages of the process. It's extraordinary to me, and all of the images that you just shared with us are they're so vivid. And of course, we've all seen your bed. We can imagine this with you, and it really transforms. Of course, most of us, many people, won't have control over their own deaths, and that's why we do the justice work that we do, and that's part of what we're about to talk about. But even the act of creating a vision of how you want to die and exerting some agency and saying this too can be an art form, just like living is an art. Dying can be an art. I can design it. I can have desires for it. I can get curious about it. I mean, this is something else that really strikes me, and a few of people have written this in the chat too. I'm at a stage where I'm at the very beginning of confronting my own death. The question for me is how to come to terms with the mere fact that we are all going to die. To me, this is like an enormous question that I'm just at the beginning of answering. You're not coming to terms with the fact that we're all going to die. You're not coming to terms with your own death. You're not accepting your own death. You're at this far out phase of getting deeply curious about what dying is and what death is. And you want to experience it in its fullness. You yes. would accept some degree of pain if it meant being able to be cogent enough through the process that you could truly experience whatever washes over you, including sadness, anxiety, depression, fear. You're curious about whatever that experience is. I find this just very profound. And it's a concept that I think many of us have come into, or perhaps practice through a mindfulness practice. Certainly it's taught in Buddhist practice to cultivate this a mindset of awareness, of noticing, including during times of pain or of challenge, or especially during those times, perhaps. But to have spent years preparing to cultivate that kind of attunement and awareness and curiosity about your own dying process, I find very profound.
I would like to talk a little bit more about it.
Please.
So one of the things that's happening with this positive death movement is the doula movement. Now, many of you probably have heard about birth doulas, women, some men, but primarily women, who are with women as they give birth to offer spiritual and emotional support, not to do any of the nursing activities, but to be there for the woman. And now there are end-of-life doulas, and it's growing fast. And their education is based primarily on what I was talking about, palliative care. And so when I talk about that, I have a problem with the end goal being palliative care, not with palliative care itself, but with the end goal being then it's a good death if a person is not experiencing pain and suffering. And it occurred to me quite recently that many women decide to have a natural childbirth and have no medication for the pain. And it's very painful. Having a baby is very, very painful. And how come that's okay? Now, the very first time that I mentioned this in one of the death cafes that I was working in, someone responded, well, if you have natural childbirth, at the end you have a baby. What do you have at the end of your dying? And I said, well, that's the whole point. We don't know. That's what I want you all to think about. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you decide that you don't want any pain or suffering, and that's the most important thing for you, and you'll take whatever medications that you need to end the anxiety, because a lot of pain is made much, much worse because of anxiety. But if that's what you choose, I totally support that. But I want people to know that there's something else. Now, I very recently, like only a week or two ago, came across something on YouTube of an experiment that was done, that people were asked to plunge their arm in a bucket of ice cold water with ice in it. And it turns out that the people who could respond to it, who could yell, ah, it hurts, ah, they were able to keep their arm in this ice water much longer than the people who just couldn't respond to it, but just experienced the pain and pulled their arm out. So I have made arrangements, early on I made arrangements for an acupuncturist to help me at my end of life, because I don't want to experience a lot of pain and suffering. But I have since thought that maybe I could tolerate some. I don't know. I don't know how much I could tolerate. I don't know how much I would have. But the acupuncturist is there, and she would help me with it if need be. So I really hope that people who are on this Zoom call will think about that dying well perhaps could be experiencing it. And what I'm thinking, because I've read that at the end of life, that many times we give up all of our neuroses and we can have a transcendental experience. And I would love that. I know, I've always, I don't know, I've often for a long time heard and believed that we're all connected emotionally, that we need relationships. But recently I learned, and I'm surprised that I didn't know this all along as a nurse and studying the subject, but I recently learned that we are connected physically, that in order to have a healthy gut biome, that we need to have relationships. We need to exchange our viruses and bacteria, the good ones that we need for health. And so that has had an impact on me. Not only do I think that when I die and my body deteriorates that something's going to grow, but I've started to think that, oh, when I die, I'm not alone. I mean, the dying process is, you do have to do that alone, but there's a connection, there's something more, which I never thought of. I never experienced that, and I like that. I'm happy to know about that. Now, when I talk about these things to doulas, because I've taken a number of doula trainings, I decided not to become a doula. I never became certified. So if I talk about this to people in the field, they'll yeah me, but they're into palliative care. And I want you all to know that there's something beyond palliative care.
You said dying well perhaps could be experiencing it.
Yeah.
I want to sit with that line.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that, so I've heard that this transcendental experience is that what I'm hoping for, and I would be fine if it happened tonight, but it hasn't happened yet in my life, other than a little glimpse of it. I know it's not like I've never experienced any bit of it, but just a little piece of it. Just a total awareness and connectedness and love for just everybody. And I hear that at the end of life that could happen. I would love that. I would really love that.
Oh, I love that vision. I would love that too. I mean, it does. Someone wrote in the chat, giving me a different perspective on my, quote, leaving the party, as I say. And I think there's something really profound about that. I also imagine it as the ultimate act of aloneness. It's the ultimate act of separation, of isolation, because other people are staying in life and you're going. Or when it's somebody else who's leaving, same thing. It's like the ultimate break. But what you're saying is it's possible people have given evidence of having some kind of, as you're saying, transcendental experience at the end that actually is like a pronunciation of our most profound connectivity between all of us. That the feeling of togetherness, there could be some kind of euphoria of love and connection and togetherness at the end, and that just really changes my my thinking around it. That death could be, perhaps at its best, it could be like a double exclamation point, rather than a withering away. And I thank you for that vision and that desire. It's a very bolstering dream. And maybe this leads us in quite well to talking about now, the pandemic. So now is really hard. It's always been really hard, and we've got a new layer of hard here. We are in a time of mass death. We are in a global crisis that is exacerbating our existing crises, our existing global crisis of white supremacy, our existing global crisis of capitalism, and of our existing, in the ways that those crises, our existing global crisis of patriarchy, because the crisis has gendered effects as well. And we're seeing, we're just seeing all of the fissures in more profound ways. And, I think that we're gaining things in this time too. Those of us who continue to live, those of us who aren't in the most profound struggle right now, we are gaining a sense of what's essential from the most personal level. You know, what are my core needs in life? What do I really need? And what is extra? On the economic level, what are the core needs for a society to function? What would it look like for those who do the most essential and important work to actually be compensated and protected and respected for that most essential work, which we value as a society, you know, and on the global level. But one of the most profound parts of this crisis is mass death, and not just that, but dying alone. You know, every person pretty much who is dying from COVID, or people who are not dying in their homes, but I suppose are dying in hospitals, are dying alone. Mm-hmm. And so I want to ask you about this. This is a hard topic for all of us. And I imagine it's very personal for lots of us too. Death is very personal for all of us. And I'm sure that all of us are connected to loved ones who are struggling with the virus right now or have died from it in this time. So I recognize that this is an intense conversation, but part of the struggle right now is about the physical isolation. I mean, we were just talking a moment ago about this transcendental experience of connectivity, and then now we're in this moment of physical isolation. And then in addition to the physical isolation, there's dying alone. So I would love to ask you, Shatzi, what's been coming up for you in these last 2 months of the pandemic?
One of the things that has come up for me is something I don't understand. I mean, there are a lot of things I don't understand, but one in particular is that we are urged to socially isolate. We're urged to wear masks. We're urged to keep 6 feet apart so that we can prevent sickness and dying of old people. And what I don't understand is, since when have we been so concerned about the welfare of old people? So if anyone has an answer for that, well, that's a rhetorical question, but I don't think that's the reason that we're doing this. I suspect other reasons, but I question the one that is put forth. So that's one of the things that has occurred to me. Now, I want to also mention, and this is not strictly because of the pandemic, but has made it a little more heightened because of the pandemic. So since we spoke about doing this a month or so ago, I have been excited about it. And at the same time, I have thought, well, I wonder if I'll still be alive. I don't know. There's part of me that, because I do this work, that I'm holding, I don't know if it's because I'm doing this work, I take that back, but what I want to say is that I'm holding two things together at the same time. Number one, will I still be alive when this interview is scheduled? And the other is that I can't imagine not being alive. It boggles my mind. How could I not be here? I have so much more to learn, and I have so much more to teach. So I hold both these things. I can't imagine not being here and questioning, am I going to still be alive, or am I going to fall and hit my head and be dead? So both those things happen. And of course, because of the pandemic, the question about will I die is still a little bit more heightened. Excuse me. Elena, clue me in.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm sitting with your very sobering and important rhetorical question, since when have we cared about the welfare of elders in the society? As a younger person, I take that very seriously and appreciate you saying that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask, what are other thoughts that you've been having in the pandemic? I mean, you have these very extensive plans for your own death, and here comes the pandemic, and now apparently we know it's a long-term thing. And I know that you've been thinking a lot about physical isolation. I know that you've been thinking a lot about possible death. Are there any other thoughts about the pandemic that have been coming up for you in the time of this pandemic that you want to share with us?
Yes, well, something that I find so lacking is that people are not being encouraged to enhance their immune system. And there are definitely things that we know that will do that. Many people, perhaps even most Americans, are deficient in vitamin D, D3, and that affects our health. Many Americans are deficient in magnesium, and we need magnesium for 101 reasons to stay healthy. So I feel very badly that that message is not being put out. Actually, other than from holistic practitioners, it's denied that it's important. So that's one thing. I've been very impacted by Charles Eisenstein. I never heard of him before this, but just a few days ago, somebody sent me an email, and he wrote an article, and he was interviewed on YouTube, Charles Eisenstein. I imagine many of you actually know of him. He's been around quite a while. And so one of the things that he talks about is that what we're going through now and what we're expected to do is not brand new. We have been doing social relationships on the internet for quite some time now, 20 years or so. Many people hardly leave their house. They don't have to. They can order from Amazon. They can order food. I actually am one of the people that likes to be home. So in that respect, being socially isolated has not been terrible for me. It's just that I miss my activities and I miss connectedness. I want a hug. I want to give a hug. So that's some of the stuff I've been thinking of. And I've been thinking about that in the beginning, with all this talk about the equipment, that we didn't have enough equipment, and and the focus initially, and we've learned so much more since the initial, but the focus initially was on pneumonia and that people need ventilators. And now it turns out that maybe 20% of the people put on a ventilator survive, and many of them that do survive have many after effects. How long those after effects last, we don't know yet, but I know of a fairly young athlete who his vocal cords were damaged, he can't talk, and he can hardly walk. So I hope with a lot of, rehabilitation that he can get healthy again. But they're finding that the damage to the lungs resembles when people do deep sea diving and then they come up too fast and they have to be put in a chamber. It's called a hyperbaric chamber, and that modifies the breathing, the oxygen level, which is quite different than these ventilators, which pushes oxygen into the lungs, and it damages the lungs further. So it seems like these ventilators are probably causing more deaths than they're helping people. So that's something I've thought about.
And can I ask about your thoughts on physical isolation? I know it's something you've been wrestling with.
Well, I've not only been wrestling with it, but as of, hold on. Excuse me. As of 2 days ago, I actually went out into the street for the first time. I have been going out pretty much every day because where I live, there's an enclosure. So I have been going out, and I go around and around and around and around in a circle, and I exercise probably anywhere between a half and 3/4 of a mile, which is amazing because I am very allergic to exercise. I have never in my life ever done exercise day after day after day after day, which I'm doing now. So that's on the plus side. But as of 2 days ago, I actually went out and I went to the bank. I have a walker, so people open doors for me, and I have a Purell soap cloth that everything I touch with the cloth. So I didn't feel that I was taking much of a risk, because one of the articles that I've read and so many articles, this contradicts that. It's hard to know what to believe, but this article felt very authentic, and it was very detailed. And the details included that the most deaths are in jails and nursing homes, and a lot of deaths also happen in the home. If somebody does go out of the home and then comes back and infects other people, it happens in the home, particularly in the home enclosed areas like the bathroom is the most dangerous. At the workplace and in restaurants, even if people in their jobs are sitting far apart, if there's air circulating, somebody in one end of the room can be infecting somebody else at the other end of the room. Because at jobs, at least, people are there for 8 hours or so. And so it's not that we can get infected from a virus or just a few viruses. It turns out that we need quite a substantial number of viruses. Now, the place where there's the least likelihood of infection is outdoors, unless, of course, somebody coughs and sneezes in your face. That's very dangerous. And then going to stores, they said, for the shopper, there's only about a 5% chance of catching the virus. The workers who are there all day, they're vulnerable. But I decided when I read that article that I would venture forth, wearing a mask and with my soap cloth. I haven't gone to the store yet, but oh no, that's not true. I went to one store. Yes, and I felt fine. I didn't feel that I was taking that much of a risk. So I have ventured forth. I'm still isolating. I still haven't had that hug. And I feel so badly for people who are dying in the hospitals all alone. Mm-hmm. The nurses will hold the phone up to their ear in many cases, and they could say their goodbyes, but it's so sad.
Mm. And Naomi, you put in the chat that your father just died of COVID-19, and I just want to extend on behalf of all of us our deepest condolences and love to you right now.
Yes.
And I'm sure there are others here too for whom this is a very intimate, recent experience. And so we send you all our love right now. And Shatzi, just thank you for being honest about how hard all of these questions are. It's empowering just to look hard questions in the face rather than sweeping them under the rug. We are going to open it up for people's questions. Oh, Naomi. We are going to open it up for your questions. So think about if there's a question that you want to ask Shatzi and put that in the chat. And as people who have questions are thinking, we're gonna make a pitch. Shatzi mentioned that she began her Palestine solidarity work with the amazing Professor Rabab Abdul-Hadi, who many of us have learned from and adore and look to in the movement for Palestinian rights. Rabab is the founder and director of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diasporas program at SFSU, San Francisco State University, which has just had an incredible impact. And she has undergone unbelievable harassment by right-wing Zionist organizations and has experienced a total lack of support in the face of tremendous harassment for many years now, including constant undermining by the administrators of SFSU. And as a result, and after so many cases have been waged against her, she is now not going to be on the defensive any longer. She's going to be on the offensive, and she's suing SFSU for discrimination, racism, and Islamophobia. So the Support Rabab campaign still needs funds to pay the lawyers who are working on her case. It's a very uphill battle, and it's very important for the entire movement because it is really an exemplar case of what it looks like to shut down the conversation around Palestinian rights on campus. And so we really want to show her love and back her and support her. We like both as an individual and as someone in a position of really important leadership in this movement. So thank you, Morgan, for putting in the link to donate. If you can contribute something today to her fund, go ahead and put in the chat, if you feel comfortable, the amount that you'd be willing to donate. And let's see how much we can make together on this call. How many of us are there? We are 114 computer screens right now. I saw we were at 131 earlier. Some of us have more than one person in a room. Oh, this is very exciting to watch come in.
Wow. Morgan, put in for me, for Shatzi, $212. I'm going to give the check that I got from the government to Rabab.
Fantastic. The goals here are to stop the harassment of Professor Abdul-Hadi, to ensure that the department that she runs is supported, and to send a strong message that officials must not bow down to these bullying tactics that seek to silence Palestinian voices who dare to stand up for their most basic human rights. And if you want to learn more about her case and the international campaign to support her, you can do that at this link. So as this is so exciting to see all of this coming through, and now go ahead and if you have a question for Shatzi, feel free to write it in the chat. So I'm going to wait just to see a few questions, and we'll give them to Shatzi at once. Okay, so Shatzi, so we have 9 minutes, so I'll share a few of these questions, and feel free to answer whatever you find most interesting. So some of the questions are, how did the Palestine Solidarity workshops go at the Michigan Women's Music Festival and other such workshops during that period? Did many Jewish participants come, and did the workshops help to grow the movement? There's another question. Any thoughts or beliefs about an afterlife or lack thereof, or how belief systems factor into people's feelings about death? Someone else asks, what do you think about suicide? And another says, do you know about the mushroom burial suit?
Okay. Well,
answer whatever you'd like.
Okay. Let me first talk about whether I believe in, I suspect that doctor-assisted suicide is probably the question. And it's not legal here in New York. If it comes up for a vote, I will vote for it, because so many people are very, very concerned and for it. I'm not enthusiastic about it. I spoke earlier about VSID. I believe that voluntary stopping and eating and drinking is much more intimate. It just appeals to me more. And I'm hoping that as people become less afraid of dying, that there'll be less wanting to do the doctor-assisted suicide, which is, it's not called that anymore. I think it's called medical-assisted end of life. But most people still refer to it as doctor-assisted suicide. So that's where I am on that. Refresh my memory, what was something else?
Somebody asked about mushroom burial suit.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, the body is covered with mushrooms, which do deteriorate, although I understand that you need a whole lot more mushrooms than the mushroom suit. There is actually a fairly new way of cremation, which is now legal in, it's either Washington or Colorado, I'm not sure, one or the other. And that is, whereas the cremation with the burning pollutes the atmosphere, this process, it doesn't pollute the atmosphere, and what is left over is nourishment for soil. So there's a big push for that to, for people to learn about that and for that to become legal, not just in the one state. And then somebody asked about the workshops at the Michigan Women's Music Festival and elsewhere. I would say that that they were moderately successful. I don't. It depended. If it was a lot of Jewish women, there was still a lot of pro-Zionist sentiment. Really hard for people to get past what I consider is a state of I'm blocking on the word, give me a second, victimhood, because the Holocaust was horrendous, but that doesn't make it okay for never again to be just about Jews and not about anybody else. So to get back to the question, those workshops I would say were moderately successful. That they did awaken some people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Everyone, I see that link for donating wasn't working. Thank you to our team that's trying to figure that out right now. So much appreciation. Yeah, I'm not sure if that Launch for Good campaign link is active right now, but people are working to figure out what the best link is. So hopefully we'll have that by the time we end in a few minutes. And if not, we'll save this chat and we'll email you to follow up and tell you where to donate. Yes, absolutely. We can email you afterwards. So thank you everyone for your patience. We are really in an era of learning about technology and its limits. And if we all followed through on our pledges, we would be giving $1,287 to the fund to support Professor Abdulhadi. So that is huge. That is so exciting. And we'll definitely make sure that we can follow through. Shatzi, just want to ask you a couple more questions in our last few minutes. I'll give you a few questions at one time and just take whatever you'd like for the next few minutes.
Did I answer all the previous ones? I think so. Did I?
Whatever you answered perfectly. You answered perfectly.
Okay.
There are more questions, but there are so many, and we want to hear what you're most eager to share. So one question is, I know you talked about people dying in isolation right now. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on death support and grieving in this time when so many are dying alone? A related question, someone said, how do people of our generation, 70s, 80s, cope with the idea that because of the pandemic, we might never have what we consider a normal life again? Just going to give you two more. I know this is a lot.
No, I really would like to answer those two.
Great.
Yeah. There's talk of this lasting months. There's talk of it lasting 2 years. I do not intend to spend the rest of my life under isolation. I'm not sure exactly what I will do or when I will do it, but I'm willing to do it for some time, but I don't know how long. I'm willing to take some risks. I don't know how many other people are willing to take those risks with me, but I don't want to live the rest of my life like this. Not only do I not want to, I don't intend to. That's one thing. Please refresh my memory. What was the other one? I wanted to answer it.
Any thoughts or reflections on death support and grieving in this time when so many are dying alone?
Yeah. It's very important to have some rituals. The person who was the facilitator at the Open Center for that 5-month course that I took was Jean Denny. And she has written an article because she's done quite a bit of research and has many life experiences. And she says that we can actually be with someone at a distance. And she has given examples of that in her life and elsewhere. So I have not experienced that, but I admire Jean and trust her. So I know it must be true. So for those people who are able to do that, I support that. I would encourage you to do it. And I have a friend who has a serious skin condition, and I did send her healing energy. I don't know if she got it, but I tried. There are all sorts of Yerzites, kind of, some rituals that are being done at a distance at the cemetery. People are in their cars, etc. So, people are doing the best that they can under the circumstances, but hopefully, even if it's some time after someone has died, that there can be a service, a ritual to finalize things. I don't believe that, although it has been said, it's been written, believe that we grieve all of our life. We never get over grieving. Now, we may never get over missing, but we don't have to. If dying is part of living, then why must we grieve that way? Why must sadness is one thing, but the grieving is so associated with that people shouldn't die. We should live forever. Which we don't, we can't.
Thank you, Shatzi. Thank you so much for this whole conversation, for every word, for your honesty, for your openness, for your curiosity, for being willing to take the time to share with the rest of us what you've learned in this process and support and guide the rest of us in navigating some of these huge questions. Like, my most profound gratitude to you, truly. And I think it's a gratitude that will be unfolding throughout my life. I want everyone to know that we are going to save everything in the chat, and all of your questions, your comments, your virtual hugs, all of that will be given to Shatzi, so she'll read every word. We will follow up with all of you about donations, so thank you for sticking with us through our little tech challenge there. We want to invite you back to be here with us every Wednesday at the same time for a conversation with a movement elder to really talk about what's needed right now. And more than anything, thank you, Shatzi.
Thank you.
We
And thank you,
so appreciate you and love you.
Thank you. I send love to everybody.